May 1982. After 6 weeks at sea, the British task force, a fleet of 150 ships, arrived off the Falkland Islands in the South Atlantic. Their mission, to liberate the islands from Argentina, who'd invaded 6 weeks before. The British chose San Carlos Bay to establish a beachhead onto the islands, but there were problems. 60 Argentine troops were stationed on Fanning Head, a rocky outcrop overlooking the entrance to San Carlos Water. The Navy's first job was to neutralize this threat. Brigadier Julian Thompson, commanding the amphibious operations, watched from HMS Fearless.
I went up onto the bridge and looked where I could see Fanning Head, where there were some Argentines being bombarded by one of the ships. And I could see the shells bursting.
The Argentine soldiers scattered under the bombardment. The way was now clear for the landings. Packed into assault ships and the luxury cruise liner Canberra, 3,000 paratroopers and Royal Marines prepared to go in. San Carlos is 65 miles from the island's capital, Stanley, where 10,000 Argentine troops were stationed. This ruled out a counterattack. The British plan was to set up a beachhead and to helicopter its troops into action. In the landing craft, the Paras and Marines, average age 18, were ready for combat.
It was very, very scary. You know, there was people being sick. I must add, not being seasick. They were being scared sick. You know, I thought it was a bit more scary than parachuting, actually. We were told to expect an opposed landing. So, of course, we all had imaginations of things rushing through your mind, the ramp going down on the front of the landing craft and being met by a hail of bullets, and people praying to themselves. Some people were making light of the matter and cracking jokes, but you could hear quite a few false laughs.
Special Boat Service commandos already ashore were to signal the all clear to Marine Major Ewan Southby Taylor.
The signals on the beach I've got scribbled on the top of the chart that I used on that day. Very simple. Alpha in a little red pimple light would mean all clear. Bravo, the enemy about, so be prepared. And if they flashed Charlie, meant there was enemy on the beach. There were no signals at all. And I thought, right, are the enemy there? And the SBS haven't been able to get in, or the SBS have been captured or killed. Or is just nobody there? What do I do? And I'm afraid it didn't take half a second to decide that we went on in regardless.
The Paras' motto of ready for anything was tested when they hit the beach.
The ship grounded, the ramp dropped, somebody shouted out troops, which was not a command that we'd heard before. In all our training, even on the ship, it was an omission that nobody actually said what the order was to get off.
When Paras go into battle, there's a green light on the aircraft and the order is given go, and that's when you start to jump out of the aircraft. I think there's a different word of command to get out of a landing craft.
And eventually somebody, I think probably one of the sergeant majors from one of the rifle companies, shouted go. We all knew what that meant, and off we went.
The landing was unopposed. Marines began rounding up the Argentine stragglers from Fanning Head. Major Carlos Esteban, in charge of the Argentine garrison, had escaped the bombardment. He radioed his headquarters in Stanley with news of the British invasion.
There was a big white vessel entering the strait from the north. landing craft approaching the shore, and helicopters practically flying over us. I knew we couldn't counterattack, so the only thing that could get me out of there alive was a quick and violent response from the Air Force.
We knew that we had secured the beachhead and that we could expect at any moment air attacks from the Argentinians. We began immediately to dig our trenches.
Helicopters and landing craft continued to pour in men and materials to consolidate the beachhead before air attacks came, as liberated islanders watched.
I think most of us dug our trenches with complete enthusiasm to make sure we were safe from air attack. Fantastic fun for the children. They were in and out our trenches, very keen to learn about our weapons.
The Argentine commander, General Menendez, had expected the British to land near Stanley. At first he believed the invasion at San Carlos was a trick.
Initially, there were doubts as to whether the operation was the main landing or not. At about 8:30 a.m. local time, we sent a message, then another one at about 10:30 a.m. Then finally, the main land command took the decision to attack with the Air Force.
Heavily armed Mirage and Skyhawk jets took off from bases on the Argentine mainland. Their flying time to San Carlos was just over 50 minutes. If they could push the British back into the sea, the war could be won for Argentina. Hours after the first landings at San Carlos, 1,000 troops were ashore. Aboard the Canberra, thousands more were anxious to join them. But the Argentinians had launched a counterattack. Their jet fighters, flying at 100 feet to avoid British radar, were minutes away. Unaware, life was almost too normal for the British landing party. Brigadier Gustavo Puma was piloting a 600-mile-an-hour Mirage jet.
The main objective were the landing craft. We always tried to attack them, but we met with a defensive arc of frigates, and it was difficult to cross them. So many pilots, because of the anxiety of combat, shot at the first vessel they saw.
Men aboard the troop-carrying ships in San Carlos felt they were sitting ducks.
We were in the back end of the Canberra. The captain, I could hear him, and it was like a cricket commentary. He was saying, here they are, they're coming in, air raid warning red, yes, there's 3 of them, and they're just coming right towards us now, and we're listening to this, which is rather unnerving.
I've never been, excuse my French, shit scared as when they sealed that hold when we got an air raid come over, and you were sealed off to the bottom of the ship. And if you got hit there, you were going to go down with it.
Going ashore was in many ways the scariest part because we were absolutely jam-packed, like sardines, into a landing craft. Although it was a short journey across the water to the beach, to the landing area, we were very exposed. One rocket would have just killed everyone, I think, aboard that landing craft, so that was really very tense time.
Wing Commander Geraldo Isaac was flying an A4 Skyhawk jet.
During the attacks I didn't feel bad. I felt fine. I had no fear. There is very little time in this kind of attack, probably between 20 to 30 seconds, from lowering the plane's nose to scanning the situation, looking for a target, aiming, firing and escaping.
The Argentine pilots only had a few seconds to pick a target. The large British destroyers were the easiest and most visible. Antrim was hit at lunchtime on the first day. But the bombs went straight through her without exploding. Royal Engineer bomb disposal expert John Phillips was dispatched to defuse them.
The Argentine bombs were not exploding because the pilots were too brave. They were coming in too low. They weren't giving it sufficient flying time for the bomb to arm in the air, which is what it's supposed to do, before they hit the target.
Wave after wave of Argentine planes attacked the British warships. HMS Ardent was attacked 15 times.
It was the 16th air raid of the day that hit the ship, with bombs which had exploded in the hangar, taking with it the aircraft and its crew.
Seen through the missile sights of another Royal Navy ship, it was clear Ardent could not survive much longer. The 17th air raid of the day proved decisive.
I felt the explosion. There was a big thump, whoomph, and I don't remember much else after that. I came to and I couldn't get up. My hand had been damaged. I could see a finger hanging off in my glove. I was bleeding in other places too. And I thought, oh dear, this is it, you know, this is time's up for me. Luckily, there was somebody moving around the area, and he came up to me and said, "Oh, you're all right." I pulled a piece of formica out of my head across here. We couldn't see anything because of the thick, black, acrid smoke that was filling the whole compartment. We'd actually sort of sat down and I suppose we were cuddling each other, really. The old cliche, "I'm too young to die," goes through your head that time. It's very true.
Surgeon Commander Rick Jolly was flying supplies to a field hospital he'd set up in a disused factory when Ardent took the fatal hit.
We saw a strike on one of the Royal Navy ships, and we discovered it was Ardent. It was a very dramatic moment, because I never thought I'd see a Royal Navy ship on fire, being abandoned.
The ship slewed round, or the wind changed direction, and had this wonderful taste of sweet-smelling air, and we had a glimpse of light. We had to crawl out onto the side of the ship, which we did, and we then put our life jackets on and jumped in the water.
From Rick Jolly's helicopter, the pilot saw two men in the freezing water, but the chopper had no winchman.
As we hovered and the helicopter was moving over someone that the pilot had spotted in the water, I lowered the strop to this bloke, and he was so weak he couldn't get into it. I had to go down and get him. My strength lasted long enough to get him up into the helicopter, and I was so pleased that I'd done something useful in my life. I gave a thumbs up to the crewman, who gave me a thumbs up and pointed down, and I had to go down a second time. It was for a chief petty officer. He could see the aircraft above him, and he thought he was dying. He thought, "Hey, what happens next?" And with the blood pouring down his face from a huge wound in his head and the fingers missing from his left hand, he looked up and saw the Archangel Gabriel.
Noticed that right in front of me were his badge of rank, Commander Doctor.
He saw my badge of rank on the front of my chest and thought, well, I really am going to die now.
All commanders were old, and I thought, this is just surreal, it's bizarre. Doctors do not come down on a piece of wire picking people out of the water.
Enticknap was flown home. It was the end of his war. Ardent sank the following day, having suffered 22 dead and 25 wounded. the highest casualties on any ship in the battle for San Carlos. But the Argentinians were also paying a high price.
I saw lots of explosive tracer and fire bursting from the ships. At the exit, we communicated to see if we all got out. Number 2, Lieutenant Lucero, didn't reply. Later, we knew he was shot down by naval anti-aircraft batteries and ejected over the fleet. He was rescued and taken to a landing ship. And there's a famous image where the M of morphine is marked on his forehead.
He has got a complete fore and aft dislocation of his left knee. I suspect you see that he did that ejecting through the hatchway of the canopy of the aircraft. He'll be very lucky if he's flying jet aircraft again.
Some Argentine pilots were less fortunate. In the afternoon, HMS Argonaut was struck. The ship's ammunition was set off, killing 2 ratings. One of them was just 18 that day. By day's end, the Argentine pilots had failed to hit any of the vital landing craft. And the British had more than 3,000 men safely ashore at San Carlos. Even so, 3 Royal Naval ships were out of action, and 2 more had unexploded bombs below decks.
In conventional war, people get killed. Aircraft get shot down, ships get sunk. It's called attrition. And attrition is a necessary and daily part of the deal. Your job is to try and ensure that the enemy suffers a good deal more attrition than you do. So there's a balance to be struck, like, in this case, lose ships to put his aircraft and his air force out of effective action. We expected to lose ships. The only question was, which ones and how many?
By nightfall, Argentina had lost 13 planes and 5 of her best pilots were killed. But the conflict was far from over.